The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the quiet town as Evelyn Johnson stepped off the train. She was an elderly black woman with silver-streaked hair styled neatly in a bun, wearing a tailored coat that hugged her slender frame. Her steps were slow but steady, each movement reflecting years of grace and resilience. For Evelyn, this trip wasn't just another journey, it was deeply personal. After decades away from her hometown, she had finally decided to return for a family reunion. Evelyn carried herself with dignity, her presence commanding respect without demanding it. At 72 years old, she had lived a life full of challenges and triumphs. She was no stranger to hardship, having grown up in a time when opportunities for black women were few and far between. But Evelyn had defied the odds. Today she stood as the CEO of one of the largest hospitality chains in the country, a position she achieved through sheer determination, hard work, and an unshakable belief in fairness and equality. As she walked toward the hotel where she had booked a room for the night, Evelyn couldn't help but feel nostalgic. Memories of her childhood flooded back, the laughter of cousins playing in the yard, the smell of her grandmother's cooking wafting through the air, and the sense of belonging she hadn't felt since leaving home all those years ago. This visit was supposed to be about reconnecting with her roots, finding comfort in familiar faces, and perhaps healing some wounds left by the passage of time. But little did Evelyn know, her arrival would bring something entirely unexpected. The hotel was modest, its exterior painted a soft cream color with flower boxes lining the windows. A sign outside read, "Welcome guests," in bold letters, accompanied by a cheerful illustration of a smiling face. To Evelyn, it seemed like a cozy place to rest after a long day of traveling. She pulled her suitcase along the cobblestone path, leading to the entrance, took a deep breath, and pushed open the glass door. Inside, the lobby was dimly lit, with faded furniture scattered around the edges of the room. A chandelier hung above the reception desk, though several bulbs were missing, giving it a lopsided appearance. Behind the desk sat a young woman, scrolling absently on her phone. Her uniform looked slightly wrinkled, and her expression suggested boredom rather than professionalism. Evelyn approached the desk with a polite smile. "Good evening," she said warmly, her voice carrying a hint of southern charm. "I'd like to check in, please." The receptionist glanced up briefly, her eyes scanning Evelyn from head to toe before returning to her phone. Without looking, "Up again," she muttered. "We're fully booked." Evelyn blinked, surprised. "Fully booked? That can't be right. I called earlier today to confirm my reservation." The receptionist shrugged, still not meeting Evelyn's gaze. "Sorry, ma'am, there's nothing available." Something about the way the words came out, cold, dismissive, made Evelyn pause. She leaned closer to the counter, her tone firm but calm. "Could you double-check for me? My name is Evelyn Johnson. I reserved a room under that name." This time, the receptionist sighed audibly as if annoyed by the request. She typed lazily into the computer, her fingers moving slowly across the keyboard. After a moment, she shook her head. "Nope, nothing here." Evelyn frowned. Something didn't add up. She had spent years building her career in hospitality, understanding the ins and outs of reservation systems better than most people. She knew how these things worked, and this interaction felt suspiciously off. "Are you sure?" Evelyn pressed, gently. "Perhaps there's been a mistake. Could you try searching again?" The receptionist rolled her eyes, her impatience evident. "Ma'am, I told you, we're full. You'll have to find somewhere else to stay." Evelyn straightened up, her heart sinking. She wanted to believe that this was simply a misunderstanding, but the receptionist's behavior told a different story. The lack of eye contact, the dismissive tone, the refusal to investigate further, it all pointed to something deeper. Evelyn had faced discrimination before. She recognized the signs, yet she refused to let anger take hold. Instead, she nodded politely, thanked the receptionist, and turned away. As she stepped back outside, pulling her suitcase behind her, Evelyn felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her chest. Confusion, frustration, and a touch of sadness weighed heavily on her shoulders. Why had they treated her this way? Was it because of her age, her race, or was it something else entirely? Standing on the sidewalk, Evelyn gazed at the hotel's facade, now bathed in the fading light of dusk. She had expected a peaceful start to her journey, but instead, she found herself questioning humanity itself. Still, she reminded herself that setbacks were temporary. Tomorrow was a new day, and she wouldn't let this incident dampen her spirit or her plans. Little did Evelyn realize, however, that fate had other ideas. What awaited her in the coming hours would not only challenge her patience but also reveal truths about the very institution she had built. And when the truth came to light, it would leave everyone involved, including Evelyn herself, utterly stunned. Evelyn stood on the sidewalk, her suitcase resting quietly beside her as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. The cool night air brushed against her face, but it did little to calm the storm brewing inside her. She replayed the interaction with the receptionist in her mind, searching for any detail she might have missed. Had she mispronounced her name? Forgotten to confirm the reservation properly? No matter how hard she thought, nothing explained why they had turned her away so abruptly. Her first instinct was to call the hotel's corporate office, the company she herself led. But something stopped her. Evelyn had always believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. Maybe the staff was simply having a bad day, or perhaps there had been a technical error that wasn't their fault. Whatever the reason, she decided to try finding another place to stay before jumping to conclusions. The problem, however, was that the town was small and options were limited. Evelyn walked down the street, her heels clicking softly against the pavement until she reached the next hotel. It was even smaller than the first, its sign flickering weakly in the darkness. When she entered, the lobby was empty except for an old man dozing behind the desk. He woke with a start when Evelyn approached, rubbing his eyes and apologizing profusely. "Sorry, ma'am," he said groggily. "We're all booked up tonight. Big event in town." Evelyn nodded politely, thanked him, and stepped back outside. Disappointed but undeterred, she continued her search. Over the next hour, she visited every hotel within walking distance, only to hear the same response. Fully booked. Each time she forced herself to smile and remain composed, though frustration gnawed at her patience. By the time she returned to the original hotel, her last hope, it was nearly midnight. The lobby looked exactly as it had earlier, dimly lit and eerily quiet. This time, the receptionist from before was gone, replaced by a middle-aged man who appeared to be the manager. He stood near the desk, speaking into a phone with a clipboard tucked under his arm. When Evelyn approached, he glanced at her briefly before returning his attention to the call. "Excuse me," Evelyn said softly, waiting for him to finish. He held up a finger, signaling for her to wait. After a few moments, he hung up and turned to her with a forced smile. "Yes, ma'am, how can I help you?" Evelyn cleared her throat. "I'm trying to check in. I reserved a room here earlier today, but your staff informed me there were no rooms available. I was hoping we could sort this out now." The manager frowned, flipping through the pages on his clipboard. "Let me check. I don't see anything under your name." Evelyn felt a surge of irritation rising in her chest. "My name is Evelyn Johnson. I confirmed the reservation personally." The manager paused, tapping his pen against the clipboard. "Evelyn Johnson, you said?" His tone shifted slightly, becoming more skeptical. "Are you certain you made the booking here? Our system shows no record of it." At this point, Evelyn's composure began to crack. "I am absolutely certain," she replied, her voice firmer now. "I spoke to someone on the phone yesterday. They assured me everything was set." The manager shrugged, feigning sympathy. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but without confirmation in our system, there's nothing I can do. We're completely full tonight." Evelyn stared at him, her sharp eyes narrowing. There was something about his demeanor, his dismissive shrug, the way he avoided meeting her gaze, that struck her as insincere. It wasn't just incompetence. It felt deliberate. But why would anyone go out of their way to deny her a room? Before she could press further, the manager added, "You might want to try one of the motels on the outskirts of town. They sometimes have vacancies late at night." With that, he turned away, effectively ending the conversation. Evelyn stood frozen for a moment, clutching the handle of her suitcase tightly. Her hands trembled, not from fear or weakness, but from anger. Anger at being treated like an inconvenience. Anger at the blatant disrespect. And most of all, anger at the realization that this treatment likely stemmed from prejudice. She didn't say another word. Instead, she turned on her heel and walked out of the hotel, her head held high despite the turmoil raging inside her. Outside, the streets were deserted, the only sounds coming from the rustling leaves and distant hum of traffic. Evelyn pulled her coat tighter around her body, shielding herself not just from the cold but also from the weight of the evening's events. As she wandered aimlessly, her thoughts drifted to her childhood. Growing up in a segregated South, she had learned early on what it meant to be judged by the color of her skin. Back then, signs reading whites only were common, and entering certain establishments required courage, and often a thick skin. Evelyn had promised herself that she would never let such discrimination define her. She had worked tirelessly to rise above it, building a career that allowed her to create spaces where everyone felt welcome. And yet here she was, decades later, successful beyond her wildest dreams, still facing the same barriers she thought she'd left behind. The irony wasn't lost on her. In fact, it stung more than she cared to admit. Eventually, exhaustion overtook her anger. Realizing she couldn't keep wandering the streets all night, Evelyn reluctantly flagged down a taxi. The driver, a kind-looking, older man with salt and pepper hair, greeted her warmly. "Where to, ma'am?" he asked. "I'm not sure," Evelyn admitted, sinking into the seat. "Do you know of any places nearby that might still have rooms available?" The driver frowned thoughtfully. "Most hotels are full because of the festival this weekend, but there's a bed and breakfast about 10 minutes from here, might be worth a shot." Evelyn nodded gratefully. "Take me there, please." The ride gave her time to reflect. She replayed the events of the night in her mind, analyzing every detail: the receptionist's dismissive attitude, the manager's evasive responses, the lack of effort to resolve the issue. Something felt off, too calculated, too rehearsed. As much as she wanted to believe it was a simple mistake, her instincts told her otherwise. When they arrived at the EI bed and breakfast, Evelyn was relieved to find it charming and cozy, with a friendly owner who welcomed her warmly. The room was modest but clean, and for the first time that evening, Evelyn felt a glimmer of peace. She unpacked her belongings slowly, allowing herself to breathe deeply and let go of the tension that had built up throughout the night. But as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, sleep eluded her. Questions swirled in her mind. Why had the hotel staff treated her so poorly? Was it truly racism, or was there another explanation? And if it was racism, what could she possibly do about it? Little did Evelyn know, the answers would come sooner than expected, and they would change everything. By morning, Evelyn had resolved to return to the hotel, not to cause trouble but to seek clarity. If there had been a misunderstanding, she intended to clear it up, and if her suspicions proved true, if she had indeed been denied a room based on prejudice, she would ensure that justice was served. After all, Evelyn Johnson wasn't just any guest. She was the CEO of the very company that owned the hotel. What she didn't realize was that this revelation would send shockwaves through the entire staff and leave them scrambling to make amends. The stage was set for a confrontation unlike any other. The next morning, Evelyn woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The restless night had given her clarity, and she knew exactly what she needed to do. After a quick breakfast at the bed and breakfast, she thanked the owner for his hospitality and set out toward the hotel that had turned her away. This time, however, she wasn't going as just another guest hoping for a room. She was determined to uncover the truth behind their actions. When Evelyn arrived at the hotel, the lobby looked eerily similar to how it had the previous evening. The dim lighting, the faint smell of stale coffee, and the lackluster atmosphere greeted her once again. But this time, the receptionist from the night before wasn't there. Instead, a young man sat behind the desk, scrolling through his phone, with disinterest. His uniform was slightly too big for him, and his posture suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Evelyn approached the desk calmly, her presence commanding attention despite her quiet demeanor. "Good morning," she said softly but firmly, waiting until the young man finally looked up from his screen. "Oh, hi," he mumbled, clearly caught off guard by her refined tone. "Can I help you?" "Yes, I hope so," Evelyn replied, leaning slightly on the counter. "I tried to check in last night, but your staff told me there were no rooms available. My name is Evelyn Johnson, and I'd like to confirm my reservation now." The young man blinked, then hesitated before typing something into the computer. As he searched, Evelyn noticed a flicker of recognition flash across his face. He stopped typing abruptly, his eyes widening in shock. For a moment, he simply stared at the screen, then back at Evelyn as if trying to process what he was seeing. "Wait, are you the Evelyn Johnson?" he blurted out, his voice rising with disbelief. Evelyn tilted her head slightly, puzzled by his reaction. "Yes, that's me. Why?" The young man scrambled to his feet, nearly knocking over his chair in the process. "Oh my goodness, Mrs. Johnson, I didn't realize it was you last night. You're our boss." Evelyn froze, her mind racing to catch up with what he was saying. "What do you mean, our boss?" "You own this hotel chain," the young man exclaimed, gesturing wildly. "You're the CEO of the company. I've seen your picture in the employee handbook." For a moment, Evelyn couldn't speak. She had always known her company owned numerous properties across the country, but she rarely visited them personally. It never occurred to her that this particular hotel, one she hadn't even chosen intentionally, was part of her own portfolio. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The dismissive attitude of the staff, the refusal to accommodate her, the blatant disregard for her dignity. It all made sense now. They hadn't treated her poorly because they thought she was unimportant. They had done it because they assumed she wasn't important. A mix of emotions swirled within Evelyn: anger, frustration, sadness, and even a touch of dark humor. How ironic, she thought bitterly, that the very institution she had built to provide comfort and equality to others had failed to extend those values to its own leader. "I see," Evelyn said finally, her voice calm but laced with steel. "So, this hotel belongs to my company." "Yes, ma'am," the young man stammered, looking increasingly flustered. "I swear I had no idea it was you last night. If I'd known—" Evelyn raised a hand to cut him off. "It's not your fault. What happened yesterday was unacceptable regardless of who I am. I need to speak with everyone involved, starting with the manager." The young man nodded vigorously and rushed to fetch the manager, leaving Evelyn alone in the lobby. She took a deep breath, steadying herself for what was to come. Over the years, Evelyn had faced countless challenges in her career, but none quite like this. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders, not just as a victim of discrimination, but as the person ultimately accountable for ensuring her company upheld its values. Moments later, the manager appeared, his face pale and panicked. He rushed toward Evelyn, extending a hand that she ignored completely. "Mrs. Johnson," he exclaimed, his voice trembling, "please, allow me to apologize. There's been a terrible misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Evelyn interrupted, her tone icy. "Or blatant discrimination?" The manager flinched visibly, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "I assure you, ma'am, we treat all guests equally. I don't know what happened last night, but I will get to the bottom of it immediately." Evelyn crossed her arms, unimpressed by his rehearsed apology. "That's not good enough. I want to hear directly from the people who interacted with me, the receptionist, anyone else involved, right now." The manager hesitated, clearly torn between fear and obligation. Finally, he nodded and disappeared into the back office, returning moments later with the same receptionist who had turned Evelyn away the previous night. The young woman looked terrified, her hands fidgeting nervously as she avoided making eye contact with Evelyn. "Explain yourself," Evelyn demanded, her voice cutting through the tense silence like a knife. The receptionist swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ma'am, I thought you were just another customer. I didn't recognize you, and I assumed—" "You assumed what?" Evelyn pressed, her sharp gaze pinning the young woman in place. That because of how I look, I couldn't possibly belong here? That I wasn't worthy of your respect? The receptionist's eyes filled with tears and she shook her head frantically. No, ma'am, I swear. I didn't mean... But that's exactly what you did, Evelyn interjected, her voice firm yet controlled. You judged me based on appearances instead of treating me with the professionalism every guest deserves. Do you have any idea how damaging that kind of behavior is, not just to me but to the reputation of this hotel and the entire company? The room fell silent, the weight of Evelyn's words hanging heavily in the air. The manager stood frozen, while the receptionist sobbed quietly, unable to respond. Even the young man who had initially recognized Evelyn looked down at his shoes, clearly embarrassed by the situation. Evelyn let the silence linger for a moment, allowing her words to sink in. Then she addressed the group directly. This hotel represents my company and by extension me. If you cannot treat every guest with respect and professionalism, regardless of how they look, where they come from, or what assumptions you might make about them, then you have no business working here. Is that understood? Heads nodded quickly, some employees muttering apologies under their breath. Evelyn continued, her tone softening slightly but still carrying authority. I expect better from all of you. Mistakes happen, but prejudice is not acceptable. We are in the business of hospitality, which means creating spaces where everyone feels welcome and valued. If you can't uphold that standard, then perhaps this isn't the right place for you. Her statement sent shockwaves through the room. Some employees hung their heads in shame, while others exchanged nervous glances. Evelyn made it clear that disciplinary action would follow, but she also emphasized the importance of learning from this incident. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but it had to start somewhere. As the confrontation drew to a close, Evelyn felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of her was angry, not just at the individuals involved, but at the systemic issues that allowed such behavior to persist. Another part of her, however, felt a glimmer of hope. By addressing the problem head-on, she had taken the first step toward meaningful change. Before leaving, Evelyn turned to the manager one final time. I'll be keeping a close eye on this property moving forward. And trust me, if I hear of anything like this happening again, there will be consequences far greater than an apology. With that, she walked out of the hotel, her head held high. Though the ordeal had shaken her, it had also reminded her why. She had dedicated her life to the hospitality industry, to create spaces where everyone felt seen, heard, and respected. As she stepped into the sunlight, Evelyn resolved to use this experience as a catalyst for transformation, not just within this hotel, but across her entire company. Little did she know, her actions that day would inspire change far beyond what she could have imagined. Evelyn's departure from the hotel left a palpable tension in the air. The staff members exchanged uneasy glances, each one grappling with the gravity of what had just unfolded. For many of them, it was the first time they had ever faced such direct accountability for their actions, or lack thereof. Evelyn's presence wasn't just that of an upset guest. She was their boss, the person whose name carried weight not only within the company, but across the entire hospitality industry. Her words echoed in their minds, sharp and unyielding, forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and the environment they had allowed to exist. The manager, still pale and visibly shaken, called an emergency meeting in the staff lounge. Chairs were hastily arranged in a circle, and employees filed in quietly, avoiding eye contact with one another. The room buzzed with nervous energy as everyone waited for the manager to speak. When he finally did, his voice trembled. Betraying his fear. Listen up, he began, pacing back and forth. What happened this morning? It can't happen again. Mrs. Johnson made it clear that she expects better from us, from all of us. If we don't shape up, there will be serious consequences. One of the housekeeping staff raised her hand, hesitantly. Sir, does this mean the lady who came yesterday is really our CEO? The manager nodded grimly. Yes. And trust me, she's not someone you want to disappoint. The revelation sent ripples through the group. Some employees sat in stunned silence, while others whispered nervously among themselves. The receptionist who had turned Evelyn away slumped low in her chair, tears streaming down her face. She buried her head in her hands, overwhelmed by guilt and shame. "She probably hates us now," muttered a bellhop, voicing what everyone else was thinking. "No," the manager snapped, his tone sharper than usual. "She doesn't hate us, but she's disappointed. And worse, she has every right to be. We failed her. We failed our guests. And most importantly, we failed ourselves." His words struck a chord. Slowly, the murmurs died down, replaced by a heavy silence. Each employee began reflecting on their own behavior, not just toward Evelyn but toward other guests they might have judged unfairly or dismissed without a second thought. It was a sobering realization, one that forced them to acknowledge how their biases had seeped into their work. Later that afternoon, Evelyn returned to the hotel, not out of anger but determination. She had spent the morning drafting a plan to address the issues at hand. As the CEO, she understood that change couldn't happen overnight, but she also knew that action needed to follow words. When she entered the lobby, the staff immediately noticed her arrival. Their expressions ranged from apprehension to outright panic, unsure of what to expect. Evelyn approached the front desk, where the manager stood waiting anxiously. "I'd like to speak with your team again," she said calmly but firmly. "In private." The manager nodded quickly and led her to the conference room adjacent to the staff lounge. Inside, the same group of employees gathered, their faces etched with worry. Evelyn took a seat at the head of the table, her posture commanding yet approachable. She looked around the room, studying each face before speaking. "I'm not here to punish anyone," she began, her voice steady. "But I am here to make sure something like this never happens again. Yesterday, I experienced firsthand the kind of treatment some people receive when assumptions are made based on appearances. It was hurtful, yes. But more than that, it was unacceptable." Her gaze landed on the receptionist, who shrank under her scrutiny. "You assumed I didn't belong here because of how I look. You decided I wasn't important enough to deserve your attention or respect. Tell me, how often do you treat other guests the same way? How many times have you turned someone away because of their race, age, or appearance?" The receptionist shook her head frantically, tears streaming down her cheeks. I don't know, ma'am. I swear I didn't mean to." "You may not have meant to," Evelyn interrupted gently but firmly. "But intention doesn't erase impact. What you did matters, and it's not just about me. It's about every single person who walks through those doors. They deserve to be treated with dignity and professionalism, regardless of who they are." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Evelyn continued, her tone softening slightly but still carrying authority. "This hotel represents my values. Values of inclusivity, respect, and fairness. If you can't uphold those principles, then you're not the right fit for this company. That's not a threat, it's a fact." She paused, letting her message resonate before continuing. "Starting today, we're implementing mandatory training sessions on diversity, inclusion, and customer service. Every single employee will participate, not as a punishment, but as an opportunity to grow and improve. These sessions will focus on recognizing unconscious bias, fostering empathy, and ensuring that every guest feels welcome and valued." Evelyn's next announcement caught everyone off guard. "Additionally, I'll be staying here for the remainder of my visit. I'll observe firsthand how things operate and provide feedback along the way. Consider this a chance to show me and yourselves that you're capable of change." The staff exchanged uncertain glances, unsure whether to feel relieved or terrified. Evelyn's presence would undoubtedly keep them on edge, but it also signaled her willingness to guide them through the process rather than simply reprimand them. Over the next few days, Evelyn immersed herself in the hotel's operations. She attended staff meetings, reviewed policies, and even assisted with check-ins during peak hours. Her involvement sent a clear message. She wasn't just issuing orders from afar. She was actively invested in making things better. Employees watched her closely, inspired by her dedication and leadership. During one particularly memorable moment, a young family arrived at the hotel late at night, visibly exhausted after a long drive. The father struggled to carry bags while keeping an eye on his two energetic children, who darted around the lobby. One of the newer receptionists, eager to prove herself, greeted them warmly and offered assistance. Evelyn observed from a distance, noting the genuine care and effort the receptionist put into helping the family settle in. Afterward, Evelyn pulled the receptionist aside. "That was excellent," she said with a warm smile. "You went above and beyond for those guests. Keep that up. It's exactly the kind of attitude we need here." The receptionist beamed with pride, grateful for the encouragement. Moments like these reminded Evelyn why she had chosen this career path, to create spaces where kindness and professionalism thrived. Despite the progress, not everyone adapted easily. The original receptionist, the one who had denied Evelyn a room, resigned shortly after the incident, unable to cope with the scrutiny and guilt. While Evelyn regretted losing an employee, she understood that growth sometimes required difficult decisions. In her resignation letter, the receptionist apologized profusely, admitting that the experience had opened her eyes to her own biases and shortcomings. Meanwhile, the manager received a formal warning and was placed on probation. Evelyn made it clear that his role came with immense responsibility, and failure to lead by example would result in termination. Though he initially bristled at the criticism, he eventually embraced the challenge, working tirelessly to rebuild trust among his team and demonstrate his commitment to improvement. By the end of Evelyn's stay, the atmosphere at the hotel had shifted noticeably. Guests commented on the friendlier service, unaware of the dramatic changes that had occurred behind the scenes. For Evelyn, the transformation wasn't perfect, but it was a start, a testament to the power of accountability and leadership. As she prepared to leave, Evelyn addressed the staff one last time. "Change takes time, and it won't always be easy. But remember this: every interaction you have with a guest is an opportunity to make a difference. Treat each person with the respect and care they deserve, and you'll not only honor the values of this company, you'll honor yourselves." With those parting words, Evelyn stepped outside, ready to continue her journey. Little did she know, her actions had already begun to ripple outward, inspiring change far beyond the walls of that small-town hotel. Evelyn's departure from the hotel marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for the staff but for herself as well. The incident had stirred up emotions she hadn't fully processed yet: anger, sadness, frustration, and even a touch of hope. As she boarded the train to her hometown, Evelyn allowed herself to reflect on everything that had transpired over the past few days. She realized that while the experience had been painful, it had also served as a powerful reminder of why she had dedicated her life to creating spaces where everyone felt seen, heard, and respected. During the journey, Evelyn stared out the window, watching the countryside roll by. Her mind wandered back to her childhood, the segregated schools, the whites-only signs, the whispered insults she endured simply because of the color of her skin. Those memories were etched deep into her, soul-shaping her determination to rise above prejudice and build something meaningful. Yet here she was, decades later, still facing discrimination in its ugliest form. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but it also reignited her resolve to fight for equality, not just within her company, but in society as a whole. When Evelyn finally arrived at her destination, she was greeted by a sea of familiar faces. Relatives young and old gathered at the family reunion, eager to catch up with the woman who had spent years building a name for herself far from home. Hugs, laughter, and tears filled the air as cousins, aunts, uncles, and siblings embraced her warmly. For a moment, Evelyn forgot about the troubles of the past week, finding solace in the love and support of her family. But the weight of what had happened lingered in the back of her mind. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the festivities slowed down, Evelyn found herself sitting alone on the porch of her childhood home. A gentle breeze rustled the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of blooming flowers. One of her nieces, A bright-eyed teenager named Maya joined her, pulling up a chair beside her. "You seem quiet tonight, Aunt Evelyn," Maya said softly, studying her aunt's thoughtful expression. "Is everything okay?" Evelyn hesitated before responding. She didn't want to burden her niece with adult concerns, but something about Maya's sincerity made her reconsider. "I had an experience recently," she began slowly, choosing her words carefully. "Something that reminded me how much work still needs to be done in this world." Maya leaned forward, intrigued. "What kind of experience?" Evelyn recounted the events at the hotel, sparing no detail. She described the receptionist's dismissive attitude, the manager's evasiveness, and the shock that followed when they realized who she was. As she spoke, Maya's eyes widened in disbelief. "That's awful," Maya exclaimed, her voice tinged with outrage. "How could they treat you like that? You're amazing." Evelyn chuckled softly, touched by her niece's enthusiasm. "Thank you, sweetheart, but it wasn't about me, it was about what it represented. Prejudice doesn't care who you are or what you've achieved. It sees only what it wants to see, and that's something we all need to challenge, not just in others, but in ourselves." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "So, what are you going to do about it?" Evelyn smiled, grateful for the question. "I've already started making changes at the hotel. Mandatory training sessions, policy reviews, and closer oversight. But I want to take it a step further. I'm thinking of sharing my story across the company, using it as a teaching moment to remind everyone of the values we stand for." "That's incredible," Maya said, admiration shining in her eyes. "You're turning something bad into something good. That's so brave." Evelyn reached out and patted her niece's hand. "It's not bravery, it's responsibility. When you have the power to make a difference, you owe it to yourself and others to use it wisely." The following morning, Evelyn sat down at her laptop and began drafting a heartfelt letter to her employees nationwide. She poured her thoughts onto the page, recounting her experience without naming names or assigning blame. Instead, she focused on the lessons she had learned and the importance of treating every guest with dignity and respect. "Dear team," she wrote, her fingers gliding across the keyboard. "This week, I encountered a situation that tested my faith in humanity and in our company. I was denied service at one of our hotels not because of who I am, but because of assumptions made about me based on appearances. While this was deeply disappointing, it also reinforced my belief in the values we strive to uphold: inclusivity, empathy, and professionalism. Every interaction you have with a guest is an opportunity to make a difference. Whether they're wealthy or struggling, young or old, black or white, they all deserve to feel welcome and valued. Our job isn't just to provide shelter, it's to create spaces where people can find comfort, safety, and belonging. Let this serve as a reminder that prejudice has no place in our industry or in our lives. Together we can build a culture of kindness and respect that extends beyond the walls of our hotels and into the communities we serve." When she finished writing, Evelyn read the letter aloud to herself, ensuring each word carried the weight of her conviction. Satisfied with the result, she sent it off to her executive team, instructing them to distribute it to every employee under her leadership. Within hours, the message spread like wildfire, sparking conversations and reflections across the company. Back at the hotel where the incident had occurred, the staff received the letter with mixed emotions. Some felt inspired, vowing to embrace the changes Evelyn had implemented. Others grappled with guilt, wondering if they too had unknowingly contributed to similar injustices. The manager, determined to redeem himself, organized a meeting to discuss the letter and its implications. "We messed up," he admitted openly, his tone sincere. "But Mrs. Johnson gave us a second chance, a chance to prove that we're better than our mistakes. Let's honor that trust by doing everything in our power to live up to her expectations." His words resonated with the team, igniting a renewed sense of purpose. Over the next several weeks, the hotel underwent a transformation. Employees attended diversity workshops, participated in role-playing exercises designed to simulate real-world scenarios, and shared their own experiences with bias and discrimination. Slowly but surely, the culture shifted, becoming more inclusive and compassionate. Guests began noticing the difference almost immediately. Check-ins were smoother, interactions warmer, and complaints dwindled. Positive reviews flooded in, praising the staff for their exceptional service. One particularly heartfelt comment stood out. "This hotel feels like home. Everyone treated me with such kindness. It's rare to find a place that truly cares." When Evelyn received updates on the progress, she couldn't help but smile. Though she knew the road ahead would be long, she took pride in knowing that her actions had sparked meaningful change. More importantly, she recognized that the journey wasn't hers alone. It belonged to everyone willing to learn, grow, and do better. As the months passed, Evelyn continued using her platform to advocate for equality and justice. She spoke at conferences, wrote articles, and collaborated with organizations dedicated to combating racism and discrimination. Her story became legendary within the hospitality industry, inspiring countless individuals to examine their own biases and commit to creating more inclusive environments. For Evelyn, the ordeal had been both challenging and transformative. It reminded her of the resilience she had always possessed and the responsibility she bore as a leader. Though scars remained, they served as reminders of the battles fought and won, not just by her, but by those who stood alongside her. And as she looked toward the future, Evelyn knew one thing for certain: the fight for fairness and respect was far from over. But with determination, courage, and unity, anything was possible. Months had passed since Evelyn's encounter at the hotel, but its impact continued to ripple outward, touching lives far beyond what she could have imagined. The incident that had once left her feeling hurt and humiliated had transformed into a catalyst for change, not just within her company but in communities across the country. As Evelyn settled back into her role as CEO, she carried with her a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that stories like hers weren't unique. They happened every day, often going unnoticed or unaddressed. Her mission now was to ensure that no one else would face such discrimination without hope for justice. Evelyn didn't stop at implementing training programs or sending heartfelt letters. She went further, creating initiatives aimed at fostering inclusivity on a larger scale. One of her most ambitious projects was the launch of the Hospitality for All campaign, a nationwide effort designed to educate employees, guests, and even competitors about the importance of treating everyone with dignity and respect. Posters featuring Evelyn's smiling face adorned lobbies in hotels across the country, accompanied by bold slogans like "Every guest deserves a warm welcome" and "Respect knows no boundaries." The campaign quickly gained traction, drawing attention from media outlets and industry leaders alike. Interviews poured in, each journalist eager to hear Evelyn's perspective on prejudice and leadership. During one televised interview, a young reporter asked her a question that resonated deeply. "Ms. Johnson, how do you respond when people call you an inspiration?" Evelyn paused, her eyes softening as she considered the words. "I appreciate the compliment," she replied gently, "but I don't want to be seen as extraordinary for standing up against discrimination. What I did, what we're all doing, is basic human decency. If anything, my story should remind us that kindness and fairness shouldn't be rare qualities. They should be the norm." Her response struck a chord with viewers, sparking conversations. Around dinner tables and social media platforms, people began sharing their own experiences of discrimination, not out of anger, but as a way to connect and heal. For many, Evelyn's courage became a source of strength, empowering them to speak up and demand better treatment in their own lives. Meanwhile, the hotel where Evelyn's ordeal had taken place became a shining example of transformation. Under new management, and with ongoing support from Evelyn herself, the staff embraced the changes wholeheartedly. Employees who had once felt uncomfortable addressing issues of bias now led discussions during team meetings, encouraging open dialogue and accountability. Guests noticed the shift immediately, praising the hotel for its welcoming atmosphere and attentive service. One evening, a weary traveler named Marcus arrived at the hotel after a long day of driving. He was a tall black man with kind eyes and a warm smile, though his shoulders sagged under the weight of exhaustion. When he approached the front desk, the receptionist greeted him warmly, offering assistance before he even had a chance to ask. "Welcome," "To our hotel, Mr. Carter," she said, glancing at his reservation. "We have your room ready. It's one of our best suites. Would you like help with your bags?" Marcus blinked, surprised by the level of care. "Thank you," he replied, his voice tinged with gratitude. "This is unexpected." The receptionist smiled brightly. "It's our pleasure. We aim to make every guest feel special." As Marcus settled into his room later that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that something remarkable had occurred. It wasn't just the efficiency of the check-in process or the cleanliness of the suite. It was the genuine warmth exuded by the staff. When he checked out the next morning, he left a glowing review online, mentioning how the hotel had restored his faith in humanity. Stories like Marcus's became commonplace, reinforcing Evelyn's belief that small actions could lead to big changes. Each positive interaction served as proof that empathy and professionalism weren't abstract concepts. They were tangible practices that could transform lives. Back at her office, Evelyn reflected on the progress made over the past year. Reports showed a significant decrease in complaints related to discrimination, while employee satisfaction scores reached an all-time high. Hotels under her company's umbrella reported record-breaking occupancy rates, thanks in part to the growing reputation for excellence in customer service. But Evelyn knew that numbers alone couldn't measure success. True victory lay in the connections forged between people, the moments of understanding, compassion, and mutual respect. To celebrate the anniversary of the Hospitality for All campaign, Evelyn organized a gala event at one of her flagship properties. Executives, employees, and community leaders gathered to honor the strides made toward inclusivity. Speeches were delivered, awards were handed out, and tears were shed as individuals shared their personal journeys of growth and redemption. When it was Evelyn's turn to speak, she stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. Dressed in a striking navy blue suit, she looked every bit the leader she was, strong, composed, and radiating wisdom. As the audience quieted, she began her speech with a simple yet powerful statement. "Change begins with awareness," she said, her voice steady and clear. "But it doesn't end there. Awareness must lead to action, and action must lead to accountability. Tonight we celebrate not just what we've accomplished, but what we continue to strive for. A world where everyone feels valued, respected, and loved." Her words brought the crowd to their feet, cheers echoing through the grand ballroom. Among those applauding was Maya, Evelyn's niece, who had traveled from their hometown to attend the event. Watching her aunt command the stage with grace and authority filled her with immense pride. After the ceremony, Maya approached Evelyn, her eyes shining with admiration. "You're changing the world, Aunt Evelyn," she said, hugging her tightly. "I'm so proud of you." Evelyn hugged her back, her heart swelling with emotion. "I'm not doing it alone, sweetheart. People like you, young, passionate, and full of hope, are the ones who will carry this torch forward. My job is to light the way." Though Evelyn eventually retired from her position as CEO, her legacy endured. New hires learned about her courage and leadership during orientation sessions, drawing inspiration from her unwavering dedication to justice. The Hospitality for All campaign expanded globally, reaching countries where discrimination remained rampant, and countless individuals, from hotel staff to travelers, continued to share Evelyn's story, ensuring that her message of equality and compassion lived on. Years later, when Evelyn passed away peacefully in her sleep, tributes poured in from around the globe. Former employees spoke of her kindness and mentorship, while guests recalled the transformative experiences they'd had at her hotels. In her obituary, a single line captured the essence of her life. "Evelyn Johnson taught us that true hospitality begins with respect, and that sometimes even the CEO needs to remind her own team of that simple truth." And so Evelyn's story became more than just a tale of triumph over adversity. It became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, light can emerge if we choose to stand firm in our values. Through her courage, resilience, and vision, Evelyn ensured that future generations would inherit a world where everyone, regardless of race, age, or background, could walk into any space and feel like they belonged.